basically every place I've lived since, you check a box that says, whether you're Democrat, independent, or Republican, and I've always registered as an independent. And I always voted. I voted for both Democrats and Republicans, depending on what the election was. But around 2007, I had a couple of friends who were in some pretty tough situations. So I had buddies who were in Iraq. I had friends that were discharged from the military because of Don't Ask, Don't Tell. I had a buddy in college. He was at community college and had to decide one semester whether he was going to get eyeglasses to see the board or textbooks for the semester. He couldn't afford both because he didn't have enough financial aid and he didn't have healthcare. And so I started thinking about this, and I thought, well, okay, clearly neither political party has really helped buddies of mine. If they had, then they wouldn't be in this situation. And I really liked that the president was campaigning, not taking any federal lobbyist money, sort of standing up for things that he believed in. He had a very different background than a lot of the other people running for president. He had worked in communities before, taught constitutional law, which I guess is fitting today. And so I thought, all right, I'll help him out. I'll go to Iowa, knock on some doors, and make phone calls since they have the first caucus in the country. So I was going to go out there for about 3 days and volunteer. Ended up staying for about 3 months, mostly because of young organizers that I met and volunteers, and a lot of people that had stakes that were even higher than what friends of mine were dealing with, and that's why they were knocking on doors and making phone calls and volunteering. And I guess the other part to this was that there was a writers' strike in Hollywood at the time, so there was no Stoner movie for me to do that year. So it wasn't such a bad thing for me to move out to Iowa and have the chance to be part of that. But after the president won the Iowa caucuses, I had the chance to go to about 26 other states for him, and in each of those places I met other young volunteers and organizers that were doing the same thing that I was doing because of their friends and folks they had serving overseas, or people that they wanted to be able to afford college or trade school. And then after the president won, I basically got a phone call and said, do you want to continue working on youth outreach like you were doing on the campaign, except in a much more nonpartisan way in the White House? I'm like, what am I going to say? No, I got to play a fake doctor again? Like, yes, of course. I would be honored to serve in the White House. So I served there for about 2 years as the point person on youth outreach. And especially as an independent, I really enjoyed this because the president's mandate for us was that he wanted us to reach out to young progressives, young conservatives, everybody in between, to talk about the issues that really mattered and talk about what his plan was and how he was going to execute it with their help. And I really got the chance to see a side to the president that I think a lot of folks don't get to see. So when you turn on the TV, the things that you think of, is he a really friendly guy? Yes. Is he funny? Yes. Is he smart? Yeah, all that stuff is true. But having had the chance to see him fight really hard behind the scenes for things that mattered to young people was really inspirational and stuff that I love to talk about, primarily because the press doesn't often talk about it. So whether you're turning on Fox or CNN or MSNBC, they don't usually talk about things like student loans or our friends coming home from Iraq. But the president fought really hard for those things. And I remember there was one particular day, so shortly after he was inaugurated, the president followed through on this commitment that he made during the election the last time around. He said he wanted to create something called the American Opportunity Tax Credit, which is about $10,000 that young people would get over the course of 4 years to go to college or technical school. He ended up getting this thing done. If you guys don't know about it, it's probably because you're dependents, so ask your parents, and they're hopefully claiming the roughly $2,500 they get every year for you guys to be in school. But he created this thing, and when there was a budget disagreement and a conversation with our Republican friends on things like taxes and keeping taxes low for middle-class families, the president met with Speaker Boehner, and that day I got this email at my desk. And by the way, like, working at the White House, just to contextualize it for you, I'm not like kicking it in the Oval Office every day with the president. So if that's your image, I love that that's your image. That's not the reality. They're really crowded offices. There are about 6 of us sharing little cubicles. And I get this email that shows up that says, from a colleague of mine on the economic team, dude, call me, badass story for you. So I called him. I'm like, okay, so we're putting that on work email. That's good to know. I said, what's the story? He said, well, the president was sitting down with Speaker Boehner and some of our Republican friends to talk about whatever compromises we had to make in terms of things like the tax code and budget priorities. And apparently when they sat down, Speaker Boehner said, Mr. President, let's agree, before you get us to talk about what we're going to compromise on, you should know that in order to have that conversation, we need you to get rid of the American Opportunity Tax Credit. president said, why would I do that? This is a college tax credit that's going to benefit folks. It's going to obviously going to make folks smarter and give them an education, but it's also going to make us much more competitive in a global marketplace. So we'll have innovative jobs that are coming back to the United States, manufacturing jobs that come back here. Why would I ever get rid of that? It's something that's going to benefit young people. And the Republicans said, look, we don't believe that the role of government is to subsidize education. And so you had this philosophical disagreement that I think still exists today, where folks on the right say the role of government is not to make college more affordable, and obviously the president and those of us that are working in this campaign firmly disagree. And so you had this situation where they were saying, well, we're not going to talk about anything else unless you agree to get rid of this tax credit. And so the president sat there and he stood up and he said, okay, well then you guys get to explain to young Americans why you don't think that government should help them out with college tuition. And he walked out. And so I was listening to the story, I'm like, yeah, I agree, that's a pretty badass story. But I think the point of it was that after that, what we got to see was not only did the president stand up and fight for young Americans, he's always willing to have a rational conversation about compromises that might need to be made to get to a point where everyone's happy. But when the other side is saying it's a non-starter unless you're cutting everything out of student aid, that's not something that he was going to support. So he walked out. Speaker Boehner was the one that had to cave on this particular issue, and college tax credit for you guys is still there. And having had the chance to be at the White House and hear that story and really see what that was like behind the scenes was incredible. And it's something that I basically saw on a weekly basis. Whether it was the president standing up to folks who didn't want us to bring our friends home from Iraq and say we're going to do it anyway in a responsible way, and now all our buddies are home from Iraq, or repealing Don't Ask, Don't Tell, standing up for marriage equality, making sure you can stay on your parents' health insurance plan until you're 26. These were all things that took a lot of work and took a lot of effort, not just on his part, but on the part of a lot of young organizers. And that was really awesome to see. On the flip side to that, there were also really kind of heartfelt, more emotional moments. There was a day at the White House where I was, so one of the things in addition to youth outreach that a bunch of us were tasked with was following through on the president's commitment. He likes to talk about how no American should slip through the cracks. And what does that mean? That means that whether you're in a rural community, an urban community, any constituency community in between, there are a lot of federal services that over time have grown to be either wasteful or that certain communities can't access. Maybe it's because of language issues, maybe it's because they don't know that certain resources are there. Case in point is something like the Small Business Administration, which is a pretty small government agency, but they can help folks get loans. So for young entrepreneurs, young people that are graduating college, they want to start a small business, it's harder for you guys to get loans from the private sector because you don't have credit yet, or they consider your student loans to be damaged credit. And so the SBA, for example, the president helped them loosen up capital for young people to start their small business and get loans. But a lot of people don't know about it, right? So helping get the word out about things like that. One of the things that I also worked on was an executive order in the same vein that focused on Asian American and Pacific Islander communities. This is a group that gets lumped into the category Asian American, but there are like 50 different subgroups. A lot of them don't speak English as their first language and are trying to learn, trying to integrate. Some of them have health disparities like hepatitis or other illnesses that could be a public health risk if this is a community that's sort of living in the shadows. So just like he was doing with urban, rural communities, other ethnic communities, this one particular executive order focused on this community, and I had to sort of see it through. So the president says, I want to sign an executive order on this particular issue, and then a staffer, in this case me, has to see it through this process for a couple of months, and then the president signs it in a signing ceremony. It's usually in the east wing of the White House, which is right below where the first family lives, and down a couple of long hallways from where the staff offices are. And I realized about a week before this event, I thought, this is my first event for the President of the United States. I do not want to screw this up. So I told my intern, James, I'm like, look, man, the Saturday before, the boss is signing this on Monday. Saturday before, I need you to come into work, and we're going to walk through everything that's going to happen on Monday. He's like, man, you're making me come in on a weekend. I'm like, James, you're interning at the White House. Like, you should want to come in every day. He's like, yeah, I guess you're right. So I make James come in on a Saturday, and the rule here is that you're encouraged to work through the weekend, but you're not encouraged, in fact, you're not supposed to go into the East Wing or to the places where the first family lives on the weekend. Basically, don't go to their house on the weekend. I think that's pretty reasonable. But I didn't care because I was super nervous about this event on Monday. So James and I are working in my office for a couple hours, and then I'm telling him, okay, we're going to walk through the West Wing, through the Colonnade, into the East Wing, and we're going to spend 20 minutes running through this event. So we go in there, here's where the president's going to come out, here's where he's going to sign this thing, here's where he's shaking hands with community members that he's invited. And on our way back to my office, after I felt relieved that we knew what we were doing, we're walking back down the White House Colonnade, again, this long outdoor hallway that's probably like 3 times the size of this room. And all the way at the end is a guy in a button-down and slacks who looks a lot like the president. And James just looks at me and he stops for a second and he's like, I think that's Barack Obama. I was like, yes, James, I think you're right. Well, what do we do? I don't know, man. It's not something I do every day. So we get closer, and obviously we're going to continue on our office, and the president stops us and he says, hey man, what are you doing? And of course all I could hear was, what are you doing in my house? Which is not what he meant. But we stopped to talk briefly, and I said, sir, I don't know if you remember a couple of months ago, you authorized this executive order that's done now, and you're going to be signing it on Monday. And he goes, no, I remember exactly what it is. And he said, I'm glad that we're finally doing that. It's the right thing to do. And I kind of stopped for a second, and I looked at the president, and I looked at James, and I realized here we were standing in the middle of this White House Colonnade next to the Rose Garden, this incredibly historic building. There was nobody else around to hear this. There were no journalists. The Secret Service guys were way off to the side. And here I was with a junior White House staffer, with my intern, and the President of the United States was coming from the Oval Office, where he had presumably just spent a couple of hours working on something that wasn't really going to get him any political capital. He wasn't doing it because reporters were going to cover it. He was doing it because he believed that it was the right thing to do. And that was something that was really inspiring to me when, went back to my office, said goodbye to the president. James was like, can I call my mom? It's good Obama. Like, yeah, man, go ahead. Can I Facebook it? No, you're at work. You cannot Facebook your conversation with the president. But I think what stuck with me after that was knowing that the president was doing these things because they were the right thing to do. But also, a few months after this, the BP oil spill happened in the Gulf.